Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jacqueline Ackerman. I'm Interim Director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute, and we're really grateful that you have joined us today for this 2025 Philanthropy Trends webinar. We're going to be talking about what we at the Women's Philanthropy Institute see as some really important trends in 2025. As a note, we are doing this in webinar format. We have had just a really amazing response to our registration link. Would really love it if you can throw any questions for us in the Q&A. We will try to get to them during our discussion. If we can't get to them, we will try really hard to follow up in our follow-up email and provide some responses to those. And also, we are recording this webinar, so we will be sharing that out. We'll share that link out with all of you and all registrants before the end of this week. So without further ado, I would just love to thank our panelists today. You can see them on the screen. We've got Stephanie Beasley from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Devi Thomas, a social impact and AI leader, and Michael Annichine, who is the CEO of the Magee-Womens Research Institute and Foundation. I'm going to let them introduce themselves a little bit more thoroughly in the next few minutes. First, I'm going to spend just our first few minutes before we dig into a conversation talking through these trends that we see and some of our most recent research that sheds light on those trends. So what is shaping philanthropy in 2025? Well, we see the philanthropic landscape in 2025 being defined by resilience, innovation, and collaboration. And if you've read our Women Give 2024 report, those words sound really familiar. Those are kind of everywhere in the implications for that report. We know that strategy and strategic giving are going to continue to be important for donors, especially women donors. And that's true in times of crisis, whether that's COVID, economic crises, other crises, or that's during calm times, looking at the influence of sports, technology, and activism, both short and long term, to look at how we address equity and inclusion through philanthropy. Today better than most days that we've got plenty of political polarization in the country and around the world. We have gender-based health disparities and all sorts of challenges. And we know that philanthropy is going to play a critical role in bridging these divides and in driving systemic change. So this will look familiar. Again, if you have looked at our Women Give 2024 report, our first trend is based on that report and those insights, which is the huge impact of COVID-19 on women's philanthropy, especially single-headed households by women. We know that single women's giving participation declined during COVID, but that their average giving amounts increased. So you have fewer women giving, but those who are giving are stepping up and are giving more. Women's giving rates were more resilient prior to COVID-19. And this is actually a really long trend that's been reversed. I've been at the Women's Philanthropy Institute for more than a decade, and really consistently we find that women give more consistently compared to similarly situated men. And so to have this trend reversed just because of COVID, where it's been such a long-standing one, was really interesting to see in the research. We also know that women have been disproportionately affected by these COVID-based economic challenges. And we know that women who lost earnings during the pandemic were less likely to give to charity. And so this is something that we want to keep our eyes on moving forward to see how and when women's philanthropy might recover from COVID. The second trend that we're going to cover today is women in sport and sports philanthropy as a catalyst for change. Since Title IX's passing in 1972, women's athletes and advocates have fueled a revolution in women's sports, and they've driven massive growth in the participation of women in sports, philanthropy for women and gender sports equity, and visibility of women in sports. We know that significant gaps remain but programs like our own Athletes to Advocates, which is a program of the Mays Institute on Diverse Philanthropy here at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where we train professional athletes in strategic philanthropy and advocacy, exemplify the kind of momentum that we are seeing behind using sports as a platform for equity and social change. The third trend that we're covering today, and I'm so glad that Michael is here for this conversation, is gender-based health disparities and how philanthropy can drive solutions for women's health. We know that philanthropy for women's health specifically is gaining momentum, and we've seen that especially with Melinda French Gates's latest announcement and her leadership, as well as significant financial contributions from her and from others. I'm glad Devi is here to talk about AI's influence in philanthropy and how the philanthropic sector can balance efficiency, the benefits of AI, and the ethical concerns that we should consider as we incorporate AI into our work. So the philanthropic sector is going to continue to explore this and grow how AI can enhance our strategies and nonprofit operations, but it also highlights the need for transparent and inclusive practices. So I'm excited to hear more from Devi on that. And then the final trend we're going to highlight today is philanthropy's response to political polarization and building bridges across divides. As I mentioned before, we know that polarization is an increasing concern for philanthropy, and that nonprofits and philanthropic organizations are trying to think about how do we navigate this growing societal divide. With that, I will end my portion of dominating the conversation because I'm so excited to bring in Stephanie, Devi, and Michael. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and bring in our panelists. So I'm going to start with kind of a round robin quick question for you all. And we'll go with Michael first, then Devi, then Stephanie, but would love to know, first of all, introduce yourselves a little more thoroughly than just your names, with which I've shared. And then secondly, I went through these 5 trends. Which trends resonate the most with you for the upcoming year? Michael first, take it away. Michael, you're on mute, sorry.
Okay, now we got it. All right, my name is Michael Annichine. I'm the CEO of Magee-Womens Research Institute, which is the largest research institute in the United States focused solely on women's health and reproductive biology. One of the trends that is resonating with us is this understanding that sex-specific medicine matters now. And we're seeing a flow of money into women's health based initiatives that is trying to hopefully make up for a gap that exists and has existed for many years. It's long been underfunded and therefore under-researched and understudied. And so a lot of women, they're underdiagnosed because of the fact that we don't have all the data to make good decisions when it comes to our healthcare. And so we're seeing that trend begin to reverse itself. And that's a good thing. We have a long way to go, but at least we're taking steps in the right direction. So I'm excited about that trend moving forward.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Devi.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for having us and for hosting us, particularly in the beginning of 2025 after a week where a lot of change happened. So I appreciate that. I want to just take a minute to maybe introduce myself. So I'm coming off of a little over 8 years in tech and philanthropy, specifically the last 2 years spending a lot of time in AI on the corporate philanthropy side in technology. And prior to that, a career in nonprofit and foundation work. And I think what's really exciting to me about the trends that you mentioned is very specifically the trends around AI and innovation. And I think that it's a really important time to take a look at innovation for the philanthropic sector, because traditionally we've looked at the sector as being behind the curve. as having to, really step up to trends like digital transformation or the cloud, or even looking at different ways of donor experiences. And now with AI, I'm excited because I think AI is the great equalizer for us. For the first time, it's a non-technological innovation that allows us in any language to be a part of it. So that's probably the trend I'm most excited about.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Stephanie, to introduce yourself and talk about the trend that most trend or trends that most resonate for you.
Hi, and thanks so much, Jackie, for the introduction. My name is Stephanie Beasley. I'm a senior writer at the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and because I'm a reporter, I feel sort of greedy. I'm following all these trends, but of course, I think, with the new administration coming in this week, I will be following very closely like polarization and how nonprofits are responding to people feeling very divided about issues. I think that will be interesting. We, in this case, have the Trump administration in its second iteration, and I think people have learned quite a bit from the first time, but it will be interesting to see how those lessons learned will be applied this time when it comes to things like, hot button issues like immigration, DEI, which we've already seen some activity around, gender and reproductive rights. But also AI, I think, is going to be a big one. And I think that's something that the administration has expressed interest in, but also philanthropy is getting very involved in. But seeing if philanthropy can keep up, because, in talking to people about AI, there has been this concern that philanthropy maybe has this window in which they can really show or have an influence on AI, and then it's going to be mostly up to like corporations and private sector. So I'll be following that as well. But yeah, lots of trends to follow. And I'm interested to hear what everybody has to say about these things today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And now I will go kind of to the panel discussion and focus in on Michael first. Michael, I know that we'd love for you to talk about gender-based health disparities. That is definitely in your wheelhouse, but we were also talking in our prep call about investing in women's and girls sports. And so I'd love your perspective on how investing in women's and girls sports can help promote gender equity and positive health outcomes. Excuse me. What is that link there between those two subjects?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because, when we invest in women in sports, we give them the opportunities that boys have had for years to learn what it's like to be a good teammate, to learn what it's like to fail or fall down and get back up, to learn what it's like to work for something in September that might not come to fruition until maybe the following spring or summer even. And so those are all good, positive things, but they all point us in the right direction when it comes to being able to understand and take care of ourselves better as a society. And, women have long been the caretakers of society, but oftentimes when they're taking care of those around them, they forget to take care of themselves. Well, in sports, you've got to, in order to be a good teammate, you've got to be your best self. And so when we're investing in women's sports and we're teaching these young girls how to figure out how to be their best self so that they can add value to those around them, I think that's a good positive message that we can instill in them from an early age. So I'm a big fan in investing in women's sports. I finally see it beginning to pay off at the professional level, thanks to a great college basketball season last year that carried over into the pros, right? I think people love a good rivalry, and the excitement on the court carried over into all kind of excitement around the sport. And that's just a great thing because that gives these young girls something to look forward to and work towards. And I think that's a positive thing.
Thank you so much for that response. And now I'll turn more fully into gender disparities in women's health and your kind of day-to-day work that you do and that Magee-Womens does. How can funders, thinking about funders, and we've had some high-profile gifts to women's health in recent years, but that's not always been the case. So in your perspective, how can funders better integrate gender-specific health issues into their broader health initiatives?
Well, I think it's important to understand that 57% of the common conditions that we face throughout our lifespan, and when I say common conditions, I'm talking about things like cancer, heart disease, but also things like influenza and COVID, right? 57% of those conditions impact women differently than men. They present differently, they have different outcome profiles, they have different treatment profiles, even things like concussions, when we talk about how young girls recover from concussions and how young boys recover from concussions. The timelines are different, the impacts on their body are different. And so we have to understand that when we're investing in healthcare solutions, it's not enough just to say, are 50% of your participants women? Does the participant cohort in your clinical trial match that of what's outside the clinical trial, what's in society? But we have to then take that data and say, are we disaggregating that data by sex differences? So in other words, are we tracking outcomes differently based on sex? Are we tracking inputs differently based on sex? Are we better understanding how these diseases impact women, or how these presentations might affect women differently than men? And how can we overcome those differences? And so I think it's important as funders that we pay attention to where our dollars are being invested. And again, it's one thing to say that, the FDA needs, they came out and they said we need to have the male mice, the female mice in trials. We need to have female animals in these models. We have to have a certain number of female participants in the clinical trials, but we also need to separate that data so that we're better understanding the output of those female participants.
Thank you so much. Just would love to ask you about partnerships or models that you have seen during your career and your time at Magee-Womens that have effectively advanced women's health outcomes. It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to actually see the outcomes from those investments. And so can you share some specifics or some examples that you have seen that have actually moved the needle, and what you think we can learn from them?
Yeah, I'll share a very specific example for you, because I think it really speaks to the way that medicine has to take a comprehensive approach to solving a problem. When we got involved in the HIV epidemic in 1995, it was very early on. We developed drugs that were highly effective in HIV. In 2011, Science magazine came out and said that those that were taking those drugs could no longer transmit HIV to their partners. So for all intents and purposes, we solved for HIV in the early 2000s, right? And we had a lot of research dollars that went into creating these solutions. But I don't think what we understood was some of the society's norms that were impacting this disease and how it was being spread. And one of the things that we found out in 2019, HIV was still a worldwide epidemic, and it was the largest killer of young women between the ages of 15 and 24. So we went in and we tried to better understand what was happening to these women. Why were they not able to protect themselves? And we got lots of feedback from the patient population themselves, right? We went in and we talked to the communities, and we understood better in places where HIV was still very prevalent, like in sub-Saharan Africa, that these women weren't empowered to protect themselves against HIV. They couldn't ask their partner to wear a condom. They couldn't afford the drug regimens, and they couldn't even take the drug regimens if they were married and had a husband, because their husband would have accused them of cheating on them outside the marriage because they were trying to protect themselves. And what we did was we went in and we sat down with these women and we said, well, what can we do? We can give you protection. You can discreetly protect yourself. So we worked with Par Pharmaceuticals. We worked with the Gates Foundation, and we created a drug delivery platform that was inserted into the vagina. It's a Listerine style strip. It's a little 1x1 strip, dissolves in the vagina. The male partner never even needs to know it's there, and it protects the female against HIV transmission. It delivers an antiretroviral locally. We then took that one step further, and we put it in a Nuva style ring that could be inserted in the vagina that not only delivered antiretroviral, but also delivered birth control. So now the woman could say to her husband, I'm just taking my monthly birth control. That's all I'm doing here. And in that clinical trial, we had 11,000 women in those clinical trials. We stopped the spread of HIV by 30% in sub-Saharan Africa. simply by empowering the woman to protect herself against the transmission. And so it was a partnership like that with the Gates Foundation and with Par Pharmaceuticals that we were able to move the needle significantly. And now we got a CE mark on that product, and we're distributing that product throughout Asia and Europe.
Wow, thank you so much for that example. I really appreciate that it speaks not just to the science, but also needing to be culturally fluent and sensitive to women's needs in various parts of this country, parts of the world. Thank you so much, Michael. I'm sure we'll come back to you. But I do want to turn to Devi Thomas. At this point, we want to hear more about AI, and I know already in the Q&A, we're kind of understanding and assuming that philanthropy and the nonprofit sector are behind the curve when it comes to AI. So can you speak more to how AI is transforming grant making and nonprofit operations, where it's headed, and then, if possible, how can we get to the curve or closer to the curve and not be behind the curve?
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. I would say one thing I'd really like to share is that let's remember that this is new to everyone at exactly the same time, right? 2022 was the year where we all started first hearing and talking about ChatGPT. 2023, we all started using it in the same ways. We were practicing on it. It's new to everyone at exactly the same time. Are there power users? Yes. Are there those that are early adopters, just sort of exploring toe in the water? Absolutely. But it is new to everyone exactly the same time, which means we really can accelerate and decelerate as we need to learn these new technologies. So I think the first thing I'd love to sort of share with everyone is, I spend a lot of time with nonprofits. I've worked with large communities of nonprofits at scale. And what I hear loud and clear is that we are sort of at the toughest time in the philanthropic sector, for particularly for grantees. And what we're seeing is that there's sort of layers of crisis. We see crises around the generosity crisis. You've written about that a lot, Jackie, in the reports as well, that the Lilly School has done. We're looking at volume of giving, as well as, what does the individual gift look like? Who is it coming from? And I love the gender-based dynamic that we're discussing on this call. Then you've got a layer that is related to just the talent crisis in the sector. This is something we hear time and time again. We cannot retain employees. We cannot keep leadership in leadership roles. We're really feeling that people are sort of in and out in these jobs, and it's very difficult to retain sort of institutional knowledge when people come and go like that. And then the third layer we hear is a mental health crisis, and that's twofold, because we're hearing about that as it relates to the jobs within the sector itself. We're all burnt out. And then you're hearing about it as it relates to the communities we serve, which is it's sort of a combined, compounded issue. And then finally, we're hearing just issue with demand. During the COVID-19 time, which the report clearly highlights, we saw an increase in demand and sometimes pivoting in the types of services that the sector was offering to support communities. But what we really see here is that the demand in services has gone up, layered by all of these crises. So in sweeps AI during this time of polycrisis and during this time of layers, and really the potential that AI might have to address every layer within the crisis. I think that is what we should be talking about and excited about for 2025. And to do so in a way that is ethical and has the right guardrails is even more important. So when I talk to nonprofits, the number one thing that they want to hear about is, can we trust this thing? What do our donors think? Our funders and our donors, what are they going to think if we use AI for certain tasks, for our marketing, our social media posts, for writing a fundraising email or an invite to a gala? What exactly are we going to say to our donors? And then they want to hear about privacy and making sure that their information and the information about their programs and their services can stay in a place that is authentic and trustworthy. So I think we should sort of start to unravel this a little bit in 2025 and think about the tips and the tricks that we can really use. But when I look at identifying the different layers of the poly crisis and look at ways that AI can help, the landscape is actually quite bright. And that, I think, is probably the best message that we can take away. First of all, 72% of nonprofit workers believe AI can help them with the most mundane tasks. They're very comfortable with this. We know that very few nonprofit staff are actually using AI on the day-to-day basis, but they believe in the power of it for automated efficient tasks. So that could be summarizing a meeting or taking meeting notes, for example. We also know that 53% of nonprofit executives, there was a AI Insights report that ServiceNow did in September, and they're talking about the idea that 53% of nonprofit executives know how to use AI, they know about its benefits, but only 11% are really using AI. The other thing that we're also seeing is that everyone's jobs, regardless if they're in the philanthropic sector or not, are changing. And that shift in the job, even though your role doesn't change, how you do the job is shifting. And AI is a massive part of that shift that's happening. So what the nonprofit sector is saying to us is that we actually are excited about training in AI. We don't receive a lot of training. We want to receive training. We're excited about training in AI. And we believe that by training in AI, it creates better job opportunities for us. And that's where we really are able to look at things like the talent crisis and explore different ways that AI might be able to help to retain employees or to create job opportunities for employees in the sector. And then finally, I want to point out the point around donor perception. And if you take a look at a report that the Charities Aid Foundation did last year, they really focused on this idea of whether donors would be okay with the charities that they support using AI. And what they found is that 37% of the public believe that the benefits of using AI by a charity outweighs the risks. They also found that over 80% would take the charity's decision on whether AI was right for them or not. And then we come to the point on exactly what the charity's decision could be based on ethical and guardrail use of AI within the context of their mission. And I think that's a longer conversation. If we have time, Jackie, I'd love to get to it.
Thank you so much. I was sharing just for our audience with Devi in our prep call that we could do an entire session on AI just because there's so much to it. There's so much still to learn. And there are so many intersections with philanthropy. So thank you so much for that introduction. I guess looking at our Q&A and at what we had prepared to talk about, I'd love for you, you mentioned some ethical considerations. You mentioned kind of that donor nonprofit relationship and the trust that's there for the nonprofit to do what's right for them. Can you talk through some other ethical considerations that professionals in the philanthropy and nonprofit world should keep in mind? And I've seen one question in the Q&A that I'd like to wrap in about the environmental considerations. I know we all love to use ChatGPT and other AI tools when it's convenient for us. It makes our jobs easier. But I think especially for those of us who care about the environment, it's always in the back of our minds, like however many bottles of water or whatever the comparison is, we're wasting when we ask one of these tools something. So can you speak to those considerations as well as part of that ethical framework that we need to be thinking through when we use AI?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, there are three sort of challenges that I hear about the most in terms of getting started exploring or even adapting to AI, right? The first is really a skills gap. And I think that challenge is something that a lot of corporate philanthropy and private foundations are helping with today. I would urge the folks on this call to take a look at LinkedIn Learning and some of the information that's there specifically around generative AI essentials in AI. There's a great program called skillsbuild.org, which is offered by IBM. And again, a lot of really great understanding of prompt engineering that's specific to the sector. Sometimes there are ways that you can actually use AI prompts to learn AI. So encourage you to just go in and experiment with ChatGPT as much as possible, and to create the mindset of someone who's used to asking questions. I think Stephanie could tell us a lot about this as a reporter. The second thing I will say that comes up as a gap is sort of access. So where do I go for this? How do I access these tools? Are they expensive? And ultimately, what we're seeing is that there's a lot of BYO AI, bring your own AI, which is a term that was used in the Work Index report that Microsoft released last year. And in the nonprofit sector, that's up to about 27% is what we're seeing. So that means that your teams are already using it, whether you have the guardrails or not. So it puts us in this perspective of understanding that the free tools that are available, ChatGPT, is usually what folks are using the most of. And that could also be the search tools. So that could be the Google search or the Bing search tools that have a AI agent that's sort of built into the tool. Here's what's interesting about the tools. The tools all offer you a source list. So when you were learning your very first research course that you took in high school or in university about how to do research and check your sources, this is a really great time to bring back that learning. Check the sources. It's the number one area where you can understand whether AI is giving you the right thing or not. And this is just really true for even if you're on Google and you get a response from Wikipedia and you're asking yourself, is this the right source for the information I'm looking for today? So similarly, if you were to take Michael's cause around women and HIV that he just outlined, and we're getting a lot of really, really important information that's coming out of AI, of ChatGPT about that cause, but it's not accurate, you can point ChatGPT to the sources that are. Insert the links in that make sense given that particular engine. So I think that's just a really important part. And as the skills building continues, and I encourage the teams to take as much time as needed for skills building around AI, you're going to learn to check your sources. The final thing I'll say about sources is to be transparent. So if you are using AI, maybe image generator for a social media campaign, feel free to tell your audience that you've used AI to create it. And if you'd like, share your prompt. Say, this is what I use, this is the tool I use, and this is the prompt that I used. And it gives people and donors and everyone who's within your audience and your community just a chance to realize that you are using this tool and you've done so. I think people are very respectful of the scrappy nature in which nonprofits in the philanthropic sector go about doing the very important work that we do. And this is an excellent example of where innovation meets that scrappiness. And then finally, I want to get to the guardrails piece specifically. The body of work that's being done by various organizations, fundraising.ai is one of them. Another one is I would urge you to take a look at Afua Bruce, who's on LinkedIn. She has a new board governance template that she's created. It gives you templatized approaches to creating your own policy. What are you doing with this policy work? You're creating a subcommittee within your foundation or nonprofit or philanthropy of people who are using AI. It includes leadership and members of your board. And you're creating a list of where you're using AI and you're creating a list of where you're not. And the list of where you're not using AI is almost more important than the list of where you are. And that really helps to guide you through, here are some of the problems that we might face if we look at AI through the perspective of program delivery, for example. And we know that we want to keep these communities safe, and we know we want to keep this information private. We will not use AI for this purpose. On the other hand, we will use AI to draft automated emails. We will use AI in our social media campaigns in order to write copy for our gala. I think there's so many different ways that we can really identify what works for us and what doesn't, and that is dependent on the organization and its mission. Finally, the point around the environmental footprint of AI, I think this is something that philanthropy specifically has every right to sort of talk to tech companies about the best ways to keep the footprint low and to really understand why the compute power and some of the energy that's needed to drive AI in this way is so, intense, and why it could actually be harmful for communities. I think one of the ways that we're looking at this is when you build more efficiency into AI, you're actually using less energy. So as we think about our role in developing more intense and philanthropic forward AI agents and autonomous searches, we're actually probably going to be able to drive that efficiency even more and create a better footprint for the environment.
Thank you so much. You've given us, I feel like we're drinking from a fire hose, if you will. Thank you so much for your insights and for the resources that you've pointed to. A few questions in the Q&A are about those resources, so I know we'll reach out and get those and include them in our follow-up email. But I do want to turn to Stephanie. You are woman of the hour at the moment, because we've got you talking to us about political polarization, which is really the topic of the day, the week, the month. And so can you speak to us about the role that philanthropy plays in bridging divides in a society that feels as polarized as ours is today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm coming to this, of course, with the inauguration just having happened. And I was, during the first Trump administration, a policy reporter. So very much in the middle of covering how, there was back and forth about how Americans felt about certain things, the nonprofit sector included. But I also remember during that time, during the first Trump administration, how philanthropy responded, nonprofits specifically dealing with like immigration and controversial issues. And this sort of resistance. And when I started covering philanthropy, the beat in 2021, it was another moment where I think there was sort of this rage. In that case, it was rage moving probably more from the left. It was after George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and, sort of this push for philanthropies, foundations, nonprofits to be more responsive, to be more focused on, equity, racial equity, and social equity. And then you see this backlash again after that with people saying, now we've gone too far, we need to go back. So I think you're seeing philanthropy kind of in this back and forth. The pendulum is swinging every which way, and groups don't necessarily know what the future is going to hold. And I think you can feel that now people worried about, for those who did take on DEI as one of their sort of like banner issues, part of their mission, wondering about what the impact is going to be now that we have an administration that is opposed to that. So I think, when I started at the Chronicle in April of last year, we had just launched the Commons, which is a online space to have philanthropy, people from nonprofits sort of talk about how the sector can try to heal like the divides that we're seeing. And it's always interesting to me to see the different opinions. People have different thoughts about it. But I think one of the consistent things I've seen is this focus on empathy. And I'm thinking about Monica Guzman, who talked to our editor-in-chief a few weeks ago, and she's with Braver Angels, which is a group that focuses on political depolarization, talking about this is like a time to listen. And I think, as I mentioned before, with the first Trump administration, you had people really focusing on resistance. I think during the Biden administration, you still saw resistance, maybe more from the right. And now people are saying that maybe, our place is as a convener to bring people together, to kind of listen, to not focus so much on changing minds as much as like understanding where people are coming from so that we can understand how we could step in and maybe be helpful. So I do think you're seeing that with groups like Bridge USA is another. They're on college campuses and school campuses. Younger people who I think for them this has been, unfortunately their reality the whole time. People who grew up social media. I'm an elder millennial, so I remember when it was not quite like this. You didn't have social media, you didn't have people bickering all the time and fighting all the time. But I think there are groups where there are younger people talking about like how can we better understand each other? How can we work to empathize with each other even if we don't agree? So I do think you're seeing more of that. And yeah, I'm always interested when people write in op-eds and things for the Commons to kind of take the learnings from that. So yeah, I think those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. I love your comments, and I know that you can speak to much more than just political polarization, but broad array of topics that you've covered during your career in press and journalism. Wondering if you can speak a little bit to you talked about listening, you talked about certain organizations working on depolarization. In your opinion, your experience, how can philanthropy be part of that conversation and help to foster that collaboration and dialogue? And if you could also speak to trust and neutrality when relevant. So how can philanthropy and how can our sector not just foster these dialogues, but navigate this really charged environment and still be seen as a trustworthy, neutral part of society?
Yeah, I think a big part of it, especially when you talk about transparency, I think that you will see, groups focus more on evidence. I'm thinking about Laura Arnold. She recently talked to our CEO about the role of evidence. But I think, the idea is that if you have a particular issue and you're saying, maybe we need to reform the criminal justice center. I'm thinking of something that the Arnolds are focused on, having evidence to suggest why this is important, how it will benefit the community at large. Because I think we're at a point where people other each other a lot. And so there is this sort of winners and losers mentality where it's like, oh, if this happens, this is going to benefit this group, but what does that mean for me? Am I going to be at a disadvantage? So trying to find ways, I think, to show people how, by taking certain actions, whether it be policy, whether it be, trying to find ways to alleviate suffering, affordable housing, how that's going to benefit people more broadly. I think that's one way you're seeing philanthropy step in. Finding issues where there's common ground. In the lead up to the election, I remember I talked to one group, Vote Run Lead, which focuses on getting more women elected to public office. And they were talking about just how this benefits women at large, this idea that, with more women in office, you have more people focused on issues that impact women, be it childcare, reproductive rights. And so this is something they're trying to get bipartisan buy-in. And of course, I think the majority of the women they trained happen to be Democratic, but they certainly were making an effort to get more conservative women involved with that as well. And then other groups like, after this election, I spoke to groups about, like the future of reproductive rights, and I remember, the Miss Foundation and also the Collaborative for Gender and Reproductive Equity. One of the things they talked about is even though you see people choosing candidates that maybe were, pro-life, they were still voting for ballot measures that would protect abortion access. And so this is something they see like maybe there is some common ground here that we can work with. It might not be trying to get people to change party affiliation or their sort of views on certain policy issues outside of abortion, but we can be laser focused on this and also focusing at the state and the local level. And I think you're probably going to see more of that. I think that people, at least that I've been speaking to, leaders within philanthropy, feel like there's more space at the grassroots level to really engage people, where people are more likely to know each other, their neighbors, their local officials, and they don't feel as sort of detached as I think people feel at more the national political level.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Really appreciate, it's a challenging time for us as a society and philanthropy and nonprofits. So really grateful to get your perspective. Before we dig into kind of our final kind of round robin for all of our participants, I'll just reflect. We've got so much to learn, I think, from all of our panelists. Really want to give credit to Devi as our Q&A rock star, answering those questions. Thank you so much. We will definitely share out these Q's and A's and any other sorts of resources that we can provide. Do just want to reflect, at the Women's Philanthropy Institute, we talk a lot about the different T's of philanthropy, where, we start with time, talent, treasure, that kind of is pretty broadly known as a simple definition of philanthropy. But when we talk about women's philanthropy, we also talk about ties, or our networks, how we're bringing others into these causes that are important to us, our testimony, how we're sharing our stories, sharing about these causes with others, and using our voices as a form of generosity. And then finally, trust and transparency is really important, both on the nonprofit side, the kind of recipient of funding, but also on the funder side. And as we've been talking, I'm really seeing these themes reflected, trust and transparency as being really central for AI, trust, ties, testimony, that community sense as being so important for political polarization. I wrote down time to listen. We need to listen to each other's testimony and each other's stories about what really matters to them. And then, of course, Michael with women's health and women's health disparities, that just touches on each of these, I think. So really grateful for all of your expertise and for bringing this back to women's philanthropy and giving to women's and girls' causes at the root of it. To finish off our conversation, I'd love to give each of you a couple minutes to talk about big picture. What are you hopeful about? I think in certain times when we have some of these conversations, it's really easy to get down and talk about all of the challenges that we need to overcome in philanthropy, especially for women and girls. So I love to close by talking about hope. What brings you hope about philanthropy, about women's philanthropy in the year ahead? And how do you think you'll continue to be inspired by philanthropy in 2025? I'll go ahead in the same order. So we'll start with Michael, and then Devi, and then Stephanie. Take it away, Michael.
I almost started before I unmuted, so I caught myself before I did that. So I'm very hopeful in the fact that, this used to be a conversation that happened in niche markets. It was a bunch of women talking to other women about the fact that women's health was underfunded and understudied. Women's health as a field only started 30 years ago. So we've got a significant amount of catching up to play. The good news is, and I've been in this industry for 8 years, and I've been preaching this message for 8 years. And now I'm starting to see that the room dynamic is changing. It's not just women talking to other women, but it's also some gentlemen in the room who are concerned about investing in women's health, not only for the good of humanity moving forward. Remember, women make up 51% of the population, but they give birth to 100% of our future. So if we're not investing in understanding better how women's health impacts our future society, we're not going to have a healthy future society. So not only are we doing a better job of bringing the men into the conversation, but we're also doing a better job of moving the conversation from what used to be an altruistic conversation. I'm in this business because I've got 2 daughters and I want them to have the same opportunities that my 2 sons have when it comes to their healthcare and their bodies, right? But at the same time, we're going to attract dollars into the business of women's health by showing the size of the market. And I think one of the things we've seen with the GLP-1 drugs is that if markets have pent-up demand, if markets are waiting for solutions, which our markets are, they will react severely, they will react quickly, and they will create dollars to be reinvested in the space. And so I believe that finally we're understanding the size of those markets in women's health.
Thanks so much. Over to you, Devi.
Thanks for the question, Jackie, and for hosting this. I have to say that we've already seen in 2024 that women philanthropists really led the charge in terms of innovation. They were out there really putting a name on unrestricted giving in a way, trust-based philanthropy in a way that really hasn't been done before. And I'm eager to see more of that. And I think that there is no way we will realize how capable AI is unless it's used by the communities that need it the most. And this is exactly where 2025 will lead us, and where the innovation, the creativity, and the thinking and doing and execution that women are capable of is really going to come to power. Whether that's through women leaders, whether that's through the community organizing that we do, or whether that's through our philanthropy, both as donors and as nonprofit leaders and service providers. So very, very excited about this moment, and very, very hopeful for all of the right intentions that we can have with philanthropy and AI.
Thanks, Devi. Over to you, Stephanie.
Sure. I think what I'm excited about is probably continuing to write about, report on women donors and how they are doing things perhaps differently than has traditionally been done in philanthropy. But also, just on a personal note, I have a 4-year-old myself, and I'm thinking about a philanthropist like Michelle King, who is the owner of the Washington Spirit. I took my daughter to her first Washington Spirit game last year, and she was so excited about it. But also, I'm just thinking about, while we're talking about with polarization, reversals in some ways, some steps back, the progress that's been made. When I was about my daughter's age, I don't remember women's sports being this big of a deal. I mean, this is huge. The transformation, I think, that's happened, and the fact that when I took her to this game, we saw all these little girls, and they were just so pumped up and so engaged with it. So yeah, I think I look forward to continuing to see how women are reshaping the philanthropy sector and the nonprofit sector.
All right. Thank you so much for everything. All three of you, Michael, Devi, Stephanie, thank you for being here. Just based on the Q&A and the chat, I know we've had a huge response from our audience, and so much to learn. I want to thank you because we come into this year, there's a lot of news, bad news, good news. And I love this conversation because it's really provided me personally, and I hope our audience, with some energy going into 2025. There's so much to be excited about from women's health and the opportunities there, the opportunities in women's sports, the good things that we can do to connect with each other, even across political divides. And Devi, I think you win for the number of questions in our Q&A. We'll definitely need to invite you back and get talking more about how to use AI effectively and with ethics and transparency. So thank you so much for your insights. That's definitely a place where I can see our audience at WPI is eager to grow. So just want to thank all three of you for being here. I thank our audience. Sheridan, my colleague, has dropped a bunch of links in the chat, and any of you who have registered and for this webinar will be receiving, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, an email follow-up toward the end of the week with a link to this recording. So just want to close with my thanks, my gratitude to all of you, and best wishes to the panelists and our audience for a wonderful 2025. Thank you. Bye.